Hey guys, we are back updating the power rankings for Big Brother Canada 11 following week 6, and this has been a somewhat interesting week where obviously we had the fatal feast that resulted in one person being evicted during the week, another HOH rain, another veto comp, all in all, a pretty jam-packed week. But there are 10 players to talk about, and let's not waste any more time. Let's get right into the video. So starting off at number 10, we have the person who was voted out back on Thursday, but here we have Jonathan, and the plan changed once again, where initially it said Hope seemed to be more likely to be the target, but due to the plan shifting in the last day or so, Jonathan ended up being taken out instead. And I feel like this was pretty apt for him. I mean, he didn't really campaign super hard to save himself. He obviously had a somewhat notable speech on his way out. And in general, he seemed to be a pretty honest guy for the most part, pretty chill guy, pretty likable figure in the season. And he was in a good position at one point, but I feel like there are plenty of similarities to Gino from last season, where I feel like all in all, he was a bit too passive in the game. Granted, I think he was a bit more active than Gino, but I feel like that passiveness really allowed him to become a much bigger target than he probably could have been otherwise. And in turn, like he wasn't really able to maneuver once his target got too big. So it makes sense why he was taken out here. And realistically, I feel like he probably would have been targeted soon anyway. But with him going out here, I do have to leave him here at number 10. Now moving on to number 9, and we actually have another person that has been eliminated from the game, but here we have Santina, who is obviously a victim of the Fatal Feast, which was essentially a safety chain, and I feel like this is pretty apt for Santina as well, where despite me having her a bit higher last week due to her potential to take up Jonathan's spot within the crown, I feel like once this twist came into play, it just made sense for Santina to be the boot here, either her or Ty. And actually, she was actually going to be going up on the block anyway with Koozie as the HOH had it been a normal week. But again, this just more so accelerated her eventual target here, where obviously the safety chain is very dangerous for players like Santina, who may or may not have good relationships with certain people, but don't really have a number one. And through that, Santina was just kind of cut here. And in general, I find her game to be pretty mediocre for the most part, where she was rarely in the majority group. I feel like she rarely did things that really benefited her game, and in general, she was largely on the outs. So because of that, I have her here at number 9. And with that, there are 8 players left in the game to talk about, and as usual, I've been ranking them based on how likely I think they are to win based on their current game position. But at number 8, we actually had the person who was the most likely to be voted out on Thursday night, but here we have Hope. And it's sort of strange that Hope is the most likely target here, considering he's currently on the block against Koozie. However, that's just the way things are, where he was initially the pawn with Ty as a target, but then Ty won the veto, is obviously using it on himself. And at this point, like, Hope just is sort of left out of the final 4 deals being set up across the house to where he's just going to be an easy target because of that. And I had him at the bottom of last week's ranking because even though it was a toss up between him and Jonathan, I felt like even if Hope survived the block, which he ended up doing against Jonathan, that I feel like I would have less faith in Hope moving forward compared to Jonathan. And I feel like that's largely playing out here where he is once again on the block and in a spot where he's probably going to be voted out here. Now, yes, there could be a last second flip, but the indication right now is that the votes will be to evict Hope on Thursday night, which isn't good for him at all. So because of that, he is here at number 8. Now moving on to number 7, and we have someone who's not currently being targeted, although I could very easily see them being targeted in the future. But here we have Renee. And I think this past week has really further showed that Renee is just not really in the core of things, where on the surface you would think she's part of the girly pops, which is a clear side within the house. However, we have seen in recent days that Renee is largely being left out of some Final Four deals, where at this point we have the 2 main Final Four deals going on, where you have Daniel and Anika in the center, and they have ongoing Final Four deals with Koozie and Ty on one side, along with Claudia and Shana on another side. And Renee is pretty much just left out of all of this. And I feel like that's largely been emblematic of her game up to this point, where no one really seems to be including her on many things. And I feel like she is someone who is probably the least likely to win a jury vote. I can't really see people respecting her if we get to the end. But even beyond that, there are people that are willing to let her go in the next couple of weeks. So I feel like that's a pretty bad sign. And I feel like long term, I feel like Renee is probably the least likely to win, both in terms of her getting to the end and also winning even if she got there. So it's for all those reasons that I have her at the bottom of the people that are going to get out this week. So because of that, she is here at number 7. Now moving on to number 6, and I actually debated these next two as I feel like they each have different pros and cons. However, I did decide to go with the person that I think in general is less likely to win, even if they get to the end. Although I feel like this person's more likely to get to the end than the next person. But here we have Ty. And somehow Ty managed to escape this week, where initially with Koozie as the HOH, he was supposed to go up along with Santina, with him presumably as a target, which actually, funnily enough, would have been a pretty bad move for Koozie, considering that Ty is a pretty good shield to have in front of her until the fatal feast happened where he was largely spared there. But even then, he was the last person picked during that, so he barely got out of that. But then after that, Claudia won the HOH. But even then, she put him on the block, even though at one point they were a showman's. And yes, while he does win the veto, I mean, it's still pretty bad that his own showman's or former showman's put him on the block this week, which was pretty insane there. And I feel like at this point, Ty is someone who is actually in an interesting spot where, yes, no one really likes him that much. However, he is technically part of a Final Four deal right now with him, Koozie, Daniel, and Anika, although I do wonder how loyal they're going to be to that, considering that Daniel and Anika are planning to cut Koozie, and I don't know what they're going to do with Ty along the way. But I think the other thing to consider is with Hope leaving the game this week, that removes a pretty physical competitor that could challenge Ty in this endgame stretch where I could see Ty winning out from this point and obviously through that get to the end because of that. Now, I do wonder whether he would win in that situation. Where on one hand, I mean, he's not very well liked right now for good reason, but if he were to win out and get to the end, make some moves along the way, there is a chance he could pick up some credit along the way, but we'll see what happens there. So I actually think Hope leaving the game this week could actually be beneficial for Ty in terms of his longevity in the game. But at the end of the day, I still think it's Ty, and Ty has found ways to screw up seemingly good situations for himself before, which is a big reason I still have him towards the bottom of this list. And not to mention his current jury's perception, which isn't particularly great, which is why he is here at number 6. Now moving on to number 5, and as I said a moment ago, I feel like this person has a tougher road to getting to the end, but I feel like this person would probably win if they get to the end compared to Ty. But here we have Koozie, and obviously Koozie was the HOH going to this week, where her plan was to put up Ty and Santina, which was probably the wrong move for her, and especially with her seemingly wanting to target Ty, I feel like that would have been pretty bad for her game. However, with the Fatal Feast coming into play and Santina leaving, I feel like that's not as bad for her game, but at the end of the day, I still feel like Koozie is one of the bigger targets left on the board. And with it getting down to the stretch at this point, I could see her being targeted as soon as next week at this point. Now, yes, she is part of a Final Four deal with Koozie, Ty, Daniel, and Anika. However, there are still people that are willing to target her as soon as next week. And even then, I don't think Daniel is going to want to keep Koozie around, as he said multiple times throughout the season that he does plan to cut Koozie at some point. And I feel like that Final Four deal is probably not going to be the true one by the end of it, but we'll see what happens there. I just feel like Koozie at this point has become such a big threat to where I find it very hard for her to get to the end without her straight up winning out. And I feel like with Ty still there, I feel like that presents a clear obstacle for her to do so. But again, I think the big thing that puts her above Ty is that I think with her being a big threat, she's more likely to win if she gets to the end, where I feel like she probably beats everyone left in the game if she gets to the end. The main problem is that I feel like the road for her getting there is much narrower now than it probably was before, which is why she is here at number 5. Now moving on to number 4, and I did debate these next two as well, as I feel like they have somewhat similar issues, and I feel like I hold them in similar levels at this point. But at number 4, I did decide to go with the person who's probably weaker positioned right now. But here we have Claudia, the current HOH. And obviously, she came very close to winning the HOH on Thursday night, and supposedly she was planning to target Koozie in that spot. But then she ends up winning HOH after the Fatal Feast. And obviously, she put up Ty and Hope, with Ty winning the veto afterwards. And at this point, she is, again, part of a Final Four deal with her, Shania, Daniel, and Anika. And I feel like Daniel and Anika are probably leaning towards sticking with them, although we could definitely see that shift in the future. However, I still think Claudia is someone that may or may not win a jury vote. I mean, I think she's more likely to win than Renee, for instance. And I feel like there are ways for her to gain respect. I mean, obviously, the fact that she put up Ty this week can be seen as something that could prop her up. However, I feel like so far it hasn't really been displayed to be that way. And I feel like we're just going to need to see more information to come out in order for it to see whether the jury really sees that as a big move or not. But even then, it's like, it's not like she got out Ty. I mean, Ty won the veto. And I feel like with her like being able to take out Ty, I feel like that could be something that dragged her down in the future. But I still feel like compared to the people we already talked about, she has a bit more of a path to getting deeper in the game. And I think she's more likely to win a jury vote than someone like a Renee, for instance. So I think those were enough to have her above those other people. And I still feel like there are ways in which she could turn it around. But I feel like with the field that we're at, I feel like 4 is about as high as I can put her. Now moving into number 3, and I feel like this person's in a somewhat similar position, although definitely they have more upside for them to proceed in the game. But here we have Anika. And I think the thing that caused me to drop Anika down to number 3 is the fact that we've been hearing more from the jury in recent weeks, where it turns out that Dan and Jonathan, they believe that Daniel is the better player between them and Anika, which does make me reconsider like whether Anika can truly win, because before I kind of assumed that Anika had these better relationships in the game than a Daniel, and I feel like people would probably feel burned by Daniel by the moves that he was making. However, from what we've been hearing, it does sound like Daniel would probably win against Anika, and with that being his intent to file 2, that obviously puts Anika in a pretty dire situation. And plus, I don't think Anika exactly realizes that she would lose to Daniel yet. Now, there's still time for her to maneuver, and I feel like she is in one of the safer positions within the house to where she definitely has time to potentially turn things around. And I think there's still potential for her to gain respect in the game, sort of similar to Claudia, where she wins more comps or she starts to making bigger moves. I think there is a path for her to gain respect and potentially gain some more win equity. But I think with the knowledge that we have now about what the jury thinks of Anika, I feel like number 3 is probably as high as I can put her. Now moving on to number 2, and for me, this was the clear top 2 with a pretty clear number 1. But at number 2, I do have Shania. And again, I think Shania is probably one of the better positions within the house. Maybe not as safe as someone like an Anika, but I feel like Shania has more win equity than a lot of other players in the house, where I feel like she probably has the, third most likely chance of winning the game if she gets to the end. And I feel like with her being part of a Final Four deal that could be held up, I think Shania has some potential to win the game. Now, admittedly, I don't have as much to say about her overall game. I feel like she's just in a good spot at this point, which is a big reason I have her this high. But I feel like there's a pretty clear number 1 right now, which is why she's here at number 2. And now, at number 1, the person I believe is the most likely to win Big Brother Canada 11 right now is still Daniel. And I think the big thing that makes me more confident in Daniel now is just hearing the jury talking about him. Where before there was some concern that maybe the jury wouldn't respect his gameplay, and that despite him being one of the more strategic players, that they could come around to respecting Anika more if he got his ideal final 2. But it actually seems like Dan Zabo and Jonathan are actually pretty high on Daniel's game and would probably be votes for him if he gets to the end. Now, yes, it's still pretty early on, and it's possible that this could all change by the end of it, especially if, say, people like a Ty or people like a Shania go on comp runs. However, I feel like with the current state of things, that Daniel is in the best spot to win the game, and plus he's in the best position within the house to where, despite things seeming like things could turn against a shady bunch with Koozie being targeted, no one's really targeting Daniel right now, and Daniel's done a pretty good job at putting himself in the middle of the house, where he has the final 2 with Daniel and Anika. He has 2 ongoing Final Four deals, one with Claudia and Janea, the other with Koozie and Ty. And in general, people feel pretty comfortable about Daniel and taking him deep into the game. And I feel like he is someone who will probably continue to maintain that position for the foreseeable future. And it's for all those reasons that I feel like Daniel's in the best position within the house. And I feel like he still has a good shot of winning the game if he gets to the end, which is why he is here at number 1. And there we go. That will do it for this week's video. If you like this content, be sure to like and subscribe. It really helps out with the channel. And I'll be back again next week to update the power rankings again, so stay tuned for that. I am also doing power rankings for Survivor 44 and doing coverage of that, so stay tuned for that as well. And if you haven't already, be sure to join my Discord server, which you can join by clicking the link in the description. There's a lot of stuff coming your way, but for now, that's a video. See ya.